Most everybody here is familiar with the Armory. Anybody here not heard of the Armory before? Okay? I'm going to start with a brief history on the Armory and how it got started. It's kind of hard to picture today, but if you look out to the front of us, these heights, which the Armory is built, overlook the city of Springfield and the Connecticut River. During the 1600s, when Springfield had been settled, early English settlement, they had drilled their militia and their train band here. During King Philip's War, they also trained here during the English Civil War and then the Glorious Revolution, which we took part in as well. During the American Revolution, what we ended up doing was we needed to find a place that was suitable to store armaments. When Henry Knox went up to Fort Ticonderoga in 1775, and he got the guns up there to help relieve the siege of Boston, he came by this place because Springfield was a communication center then, and believe it or not, it still is today. He had seen these heights, reported back to George Washington, commanding general. Washington had also seen these heights because on his way to Dorchester, he had passed Springfield. He had been familiar with Springfield. And he readily agreed that this was a place they were going to have their arsenal. During the war, believe it or not, it wasn't just an arsenal, which is a place where arms are kept. It is also an armory, a place where arms are actually manufactured. And basically where the college and the newer buildings are now are on the ruins of the old foundry where they cast a few of the cannon during the Revolutionary War. The famous Springfield rifle comes out of here much later. After the Revolutionary War ends, this place is still used as an arsenal. The Army's largely demobilized. They still have a store of weapons here. It's really one of the only major arsenals that are used nationwide. At that point, we are under the Articles of Confederation. I'm sure you studied here about those and what that meant. However, after the Revolutionary War, there was a huge economic crisis. There really wasn't a central currency. Many of the states had issued paper money during the war to help with debts and such. At the end of the war, that came spiraling through for two reasons. One, our foreign traders no longer wanted to accept much of paper money. You can hardly blame them. And two, obviously too, they figured this is a way, in some cases, not all of them, to collect on their monies. And that had a ripple effect here in the States. So what had happened was a lot of farmers who only had the paper issued to them, that's what they were given, could only pay in certain types of specie, and that was the paper. And then the collectors themselves needed to collect money because they could feel the pinch too. So there was quite a bit of turmoil. Not just here in Massachusetts, but all over the states at that point. So what ended up happening is you had two factions of people. You had the merchants and the collectors, and then you had the debtors who were largely farmers and artisans. And they were going to court. And admittedly, a lot of the decisions were very hard on the people, and they had to pay these out. Very, very onerous to them. And sometimes the courts weren't as forgiving, so they took matters in their own hands, like they did years before, and they had shut down the courts. Finally, it gets to the point where things get way out of hand. It blows up here in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is the #1 trading colony at that time. The other states, particularly those in New England surrounding Massachusetts, including Vermont, are very, very nervous about Massachusetts keeping things under lid because they're having troubles themselves. However, it goes from a just protest when certain men take matters in their own hands. There was a man by the name of Job Shattuck. He was the actual leader of this rebellion. He came out of Acton, and he was also an officer in the American Revolutionary War. He decided he was going to get some of these men who agreed. Ironically, some of them were merchants themselves. And they were going to take action against the courts, the state government, and this armory, this arsenal. However, in October of 17 86, as things were starting to plan out, Boston authorities get a hold of it and they arrest him, and it's bloody. He's wounded, he wounds a few men, some of the men are captured with him. So now the head of the rebellion has been cut off, so to speak. However, other counties, it wasn't just out here in western Massachusetts, Essex County, Bristol County, Plymouth County, Worcester County, Suffolk County, even near Boston, had rumblings, they had troubles in Middlesex County, and they were forming them. The problem was, unlike in 1775 and 1776, nobody sat down to deliberate. They just grabbed arms and they started to march. All of a sudden you saw a big division. Many of the people who were farmers and were aggrieved by these debts, they were getting some relief in the courts, but not enough. But they didn't want to join an armed rebellion to overthrow their own government. So they thought they were going to bring matters to a head. One leader that was left was a man named Daniel Shay, who at that time was living in Pelham, which is a half hour north of here. He had really the only armed force, and he was the guy who was assigned to take, the man assigned to take this armory. Obviously it's in his backyard, and he has two men who are supposed to help him. One by the name of Eli Parsons out of Pittsfield in Berkshire County, and the other one named Josiah Day just across the river over in West Springfield. The other leaders, Mr. Glover out of Worcester, and a few others out of Eastern Mass are unable to make it, but they are trying to make haste. They're out trying to gather their troops to come here. Meanwhile, the countryside is alarmed. The towns are calling their own militias in to try to stop this, because all of a sudden you have armed men coming through their towns. Next door in Wilbraham, Daniel Shay forcibly takes the town and he quarters his men there at gunpoint. Why does he do it? Because the Wilbraham militia is mustered here to defend the army. So there's nobody left to protect the town. General William Shepard out of Westfield nearby, former Continental General, that's how I'm dressed here for those who may be curious, is now in charge of the troops here. Major General Benjamin Lincoln, one of the main commanders in the American Revolutionary War, is the overall commander named by Massachusetts and the Congress sitting in the Articles of Confederation to defend this arsenal. But he's like the men in Eastern Mass. They're a day or two march away at the very, very closest. They can't get here in time. In Wilbraham, something interesting happens. Day's men are distracted. Somebody builds a chimney, causes a chimney fire, a pregnant woman and her baby come out. The deputy sheriff of the county and one of the elders in the county are able to sneak out a message to Shepard saying Daniel Shays is here. Now he and Shays have been communicating, asking each other to stand down. However, there's a massive snowstorm. It's terrible weather. It was a terrible, terrible winter. Even in October, November, it was bad. But now you're talking December, early January, and it's gotten horrible. So, from Wilbraham, this man makes what is basically a 16-mile jaunt in deep snow, gets the message to General Shepard. Josiah Day across the river is supposed to coordinate the main force with Daniel Shays. However, for reasons we're not quite sure of, probably the logistic, he can't make it. He sends a messenger. Shepard intercepts the messenger. He knows what's going to happen with the rebel forces before they do. So, in early January, what he does is he marches his men through. Shays comes on, tells Shepard he's going to take the arsenal. Shepard tells him he's not. So they meet here. Actually, at the very entrance of the grounds is Federal Street is where the fighting actually started. All of these men, most of them had served in the Continental Army. They did not want to fight each other at all. They wanted to avoid it if possible. So as the men were looking at each other, Shepard ordered them to stop. Shays ordered them to move forward. Shepard orders a volley fire, cannon over their heads. And some of the men rush on. Then he's forced to order a fire into the ranks, killing 4 of them and wounding 20. At that point, Shay's men just decided they made their stand and they break, and they run for it. Shepard's men do not pursue him right away. They don't want to kill him. They want to order him up peacefully. Plus, there are other troops around the Commonwealth. This fight goes on for another 2 months as the other troops, plagued by desertions, go further off into Massachusetts and are finally captured, the last battle taking part on the New York border. All the disinterested governors around the borders of Massachusetts now become interested in what's going on, and some of the men that go over to the borders are sent back. Daniel Shays does come back, the courts convene, and the General Court does pass another series of laws trying to alleviate the debt. Finally, and a lot of the other states who also had troubles come to the conclusion that the Articles were not quite making it. They needed to have a central government just coin money, among other things, and assume certain debts, and that's what they did. So that is what happened here on these grounds in January of 1787. Being a constitution, this is a spot for you to visit and to really take in. As Hal said, that we were a little bit short because of the rain, but I would be more than happy to entertain any questions you may have about the rebellion, the armory, the arsenal, anything in between.
What happened to Mr. Shays afterwards?
He was...
Before the weather gets any worse, if you want to come in, you can continue this inside.
All right,
let's head on over to our...
Do the question and answer period while we're gathering people in. Yes?
You said the fighting went on for 2 months in the winter. Where were they, like, getting out of the weather?
Well, what happened was, it wasn't heavy fighting. After the confrontation here, most of the casualties are here. The only place where you have casualties are in New York, where some of the men had crossed the New York line, not very far, because the governor of New York did not want any part of it. That was Governor Clinton. And they came back, and one of the brigadier generals of militia there had organized his men on the other side of the border, fought them and beat them, was reinforced and captured. They have 2 more deaths, one on either side. So there's only 5 killed during the entire rebellion. Many wounded. So what had happened was the remnants of Parsons' men and Shay's men went into Chicopee. Day's men kind of dissipated. They captured them too, but they weren't able to get into the action too much. Some of them did. And then once coming east, their militias intercepted them before they could get very far. They didn't get past Worcester. They didn't even get to Worcester, really. So there were sporadic. The actions were more of a gathering the rebels type of thing, making sure everybody was accounted for. And that's what had happened. And the end of it is in March. Hal had asked, Mr. Sherlock had asked what happened to Daniel Shays, which is a good question. There were only 18 men who were tried, convicted, and condemned to death in the rebellion. And that's after a couple of thousand men took arms. And a couple of thousand more on top of them supported this in one way or the other that we know about. Only 2 of them were hanged. The others were pardoned. Shays, Day, Shattuck. Shattuck was the one that had the biggest sentence on his head, and they commuted it. They let him go. Shays was pardoned. He comes back to Massachusetts for a time, allowed to stay here, decides to move back to New York, or move to New York. He was never from New York. Day stays here. His house, the Josiah Day house, belonged to his great-grandfather, built in the 1600s. You can see it in West Springfield today. He was living in it then. He goes back to that house, lives out the rest of his life. Parsons does too. Wolver and Worcester does as well. The only men who were convicted and hanged were those who actually committed depredations. They had threatened people, they assaulted people. They weren't just the men picking up their arms because they thought they were defending something, even though they were trying to overthrow the state of Massachusetts. Those were men who were criminals, really, in every sense of the word. They would have been tried and convicted probably even if they never took part in a rebellion. And 2 were hanged. They were involved in, I believe, a murder, and it wasn't even a combatant. And remember, the reason they're here is these are the arms they're going to gather to march on to Boston. This is what they need. This is why they were here. However, they were not able to take it. Any other questions about the rebellion, the arsenal, the armory, anything along those lines?
One very quick question.
Yes.
What were they rebelling about?
They were rebelling about the currency, the debt they had. They were unable to pay their debt in the species, as I mentioned before, the paper money. There was no general currency among the states at that time. The Articles of Confederation was not empowered to coin money or regulate currency. It was supposed to be done state by state, and a lot of states were finding it easy to use the paper money. That's what happens when you use paper.
Yeah.
And they were going to court. A lot of them were being foreclosed on, somewhat harshly. And that's why they were trying to make amends. There were groups that were trying to make amends. There were some people trying to collect their money. A lot of the foreign traders really were losing patience for good and for ill reasons. The good reasons were, hey, look, you owe us money, you're paying us for this. The second was, you know what, maybe we can squeeze a little bit more out of the Americans. But that's essentially what had happened. The problem was, once it went from, hey, look, we're gathering, trying to get something together, to, oh, we're going to overthrow the government of Massachusetts and we've taken over other towns, we're holding people at gunpoint, then it becomes a rebellion. It becomes more of a riot. It wasn't like the American Revolution.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
So is this an American versus American rebellion?
It was. It was. One interesting story. A couple of the men had appealed to Lord Dorchester in Canada for him to help. And he unwisely suggested, okay, maybe we can do something. They bring it to the British Parliament. The British Parliament votes it down almost unanimously, saying, are you out of your minds? Because they didn't like what was happening here either. You know, and it was a Whig Parliament at that point, unlike the Tory Parliament we had at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. So it was American versus American. Very hard on both sides. They did not want to fight each other. That's why the casualties are so light. You know, for the rebellion, for what it stood for, what it accomplished, or the impact it had, casualties are very, very light. 5 killed altogether, outside of that murder.
Okay, if we're fair, we'll bring in the...
Oh, one more, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Was New York politically useful ever for anything?
No.
Because it seems like they never were.
No, they were divided in some ways. The American Revolution, the largest number of Tories was in New York. That's about 40%, we estimate. They were never a majority. No, 30% to 40%. The majority were patriots and the rest were neutral. During Shay's rebellion, the problem with New York was twofold. One, Vermont doesn't become a state because Governor Clinton and his cadre do not want to release Vermont. And there's a fight there. When Shays' rebellion starts to happen, he washes his hands of it. He just says, keep your troubles out of New York. Well, the trouble's still in New York. It's like, here they are, take them back. So he does come. Now, I don't want to disparage Governor Clinton, but they were starting to have troubles in New York, too. So, there were some reasons why they wanted to make things, make sure things were calm. But in the very beginning, they were taking a hands-off approach, saying, this is your problem. So, hope that answers the question in a roundabout way.
Okay, let's give Mr. Howell an answer.
My name's Susan. I'm a park ranger here at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. And Carl is our volunteer extraordinaire. What we're going to do is split you up in 2 groups. One group's going to go with Carl. The other group's going to stay with me in here. So first, I just want to give you a little overview on the history of the Springfield Armory. How many of you have heard about the Springfield Armory? A couple of you. All right, so we were authorized by George Washington. I'm sure you've heard of the guy, right? He's been everywhere, slept everywhere. He didn't sleep here, but he was here. And he made this the first national armory. So before the Revolutionary War, they weren't really making firearms in bulk. We were mainly importing them from Europe. And so after the Revolutionary War, what were we fighting for during the Revolutionary War? Our independence. So would we be independent if we kept on relying on another nation for our firearms? No. So he wanted our own manufacturing. So he chose Springfield as one spot for our national armory. Does anybody know where the second one was?
Harper's Ferry.
Harper's Ferry, yes. So Harper's Ferry was the site of our second national armory, one in the north, one in the south. Now in 1861, Virginia seceded from the Union, and the U.S. garrison went in there and they burned Harper's Ferry. They didn't burn it all the way, but they did a pretty good job where we were the only ones standing to manufacture. So we manufactured firearms for the U.S. military for 174 years, closed in 1968. So all the way from the War of 1812 to Vietnam. This is what our military depended on our firearms from here, which is pretty impressive. So we had over 90 acres and employed just under 14,000 people in its peak in 1943. So we also had women who worked here during World War I, 14% of our workforce. They were called WOWs, Women Ordnance Workers. So when you guys see Rosie the Riveter, she's wearing a bandana, right? And what does she have on that bandana? What are they? There's white. Anybody? White spots, white dots. Well, the women ordnance workers, they had very unique ones. They had bombs on theirs. So we have them there. You're going to see a picture of some of our wows that we have here. And there was about 42% of women who worked here during World War II. So what we're going to do, the first half, I don't know how you want to split them up or how much time you have. That's the biggest thing.
You will need to be out of here, say, 3:30. No later than 3:30, so
Okay.
that should be enough time to...
So you think 40 minutes, Carl, with your...
Oh, sure. That would be plenty.
Okay. So you can split them up, Hal, and
Okay, how about 1, 2, 3, 4? How about these 4 rows? This way. Follow Mr.
So
Carl.
you're gonna go with Carl. Now, just again, we are a museum, keep your voices down, no running in the museum. And if you have to use the restrooms, Carl will point those out to you.
Okay, just all come on out here.
Down 395.
395, and so it's south of Worcester, about, I don't know, an hour south of Worcester, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, because my father used
That's
to
the only one I know
take us
of.
there. It has
Well, actually, there's another one, is it in, there's one in New Hampshire, isn't there?
Now, this was in Connecticut then, and it was a small place, but I loved it. It had, you know, the guy on the nickel. It had the original picture of him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the old Buffalo nickel.
Yep. And I'm trying to think of, there's another one in the,
I mean, it was in Connecticut. It wasn't that far. It was maybe an hour away from Manchester.
The Iroquois is 86.
yeah, I've been to that museum.
Is that good? Is it a good
Oh, I
one?
enjoyed it, yeah. But there's also one in New Hampshire, I don't remember where it was. You know, I've been there, it's, north of Concord. It's not a big place.
What kind? Abenaki. Oh,
Abenaki.
yeah. That's
Abenaki.
one of my branches. I'm 2 parts Indian.
Oh.
And that's one of
Well, they sieged the
2/6.
Fort